Okay, so you want to make a Patriot missile. You have heard the name. You have seen the footage. In the spring of 2026, the United Arab Emirates intercepted 537 Iranian ballistic missiles, 2,256 drones, and 26 cruise missiles in a single sustained campaign. The UAE burned through approximately 75% of its Patriot interceptor inventory. A Greek Patriot battery temporarily stationed in Saudi Arabia fired 2 intercepts in a single night. By the end of the campaign, the UAE was not calling Washington to report success. It was calling to ask when the replacement missiles would arrive. The Patriot missile has been fired in more combat situations than any other air defense system in history. Desert Storm in 1991, Saudi Arabia continuously since 2015, Ukraine, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. It is the only system that has intercepted ballistic missiles in 4 separate wars on 3 separate continents in a single decade. Simple enough. Build a missile, sell it to the army, collect the money. Here is what that actually looks like. One Patriot PAC-3 MSE interceptor costs $4.2 million to manufacture. It is roughly 18 feet long. It weighs about 700 pounds. It travels at Mach 5 and destroys its target by slamming directly into it at closing speeds that exceed Mach 10. To build that missile, you need a solid rocket motor, a radar seeker, a guidance computer, a fragmentation warhead, a fuse. Hundreds of precision components machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The rocket motor takes 30 months to produce from the time the raw materials arrive to the time the finished component ships. The radar seeker, the electronic brain that guides the missile to its target in the final seconds of flight, is built in a single factory in Huntsville, Alabama.
One factory on Earth.
That factory produced approximately 650 seekers in 2025. Demand across 5 active combat theaters has never been higher. Do the math. The Patriot missile system was not invented quickly. The United States Army began developing the concept in 1961, at the height of the Cold War, when the threat was Soviet bombers carrying nuclear weapons across the Arctic. The system that entered service in 1981 had been in development for 20 years. The total development cost from concept to operational deployment reached $17 billion, roughly $35 billion in today's dollars. 20 years of engineering, thousands of scientists and engineers. The development of the world's first mobile phased array radar designed to track and engage multiple targets simultaneously while moving on the back of a truck. That investment produced the most capable air defense system of its era. It also produced a system so complex that its supply chain today involves over 13,000 separate manufacturers, suppliers, and subcontractors, spread across dozens of American states. When Ukraine asked for Patriot batteries in 2022, the United States did not simply open a warehouse and ship them. It began a process that involves coordinating 13,000 companies, each producing a specific part, each with their own lead times, their own bottlenecks, their own workforce constraints. You cannot rush a supply chain like that with a phone call. You rush it with money, time, and the slow grinding work of industrial expansion that takes years to show results. Now let's talk about what you are actually buying when you buy a Patriot battery. A single Patriot battery is not a missile. It is a system. The battery consists of one radar, one engagement control station, up to 8 launchers, a power generation unit, and a communications network that ties it all together. The radar alone costs between $110 million and $130 million, depending on the variant. The engagement control station, the command center where operators track threats and authorize intercepts, costs tens of millions more. The launchers, 4 missiles each, run approximately $10 million per unit. A complete Patriot battery with a full missile load costs approximately $1.1 billion. That figure breaks down as roughly $400 million for the hardware, radar, control station, launchers, generators, and approximately $690 million for the missiles themselves. One battery, $1 billion.
Before training, spare parts, maintenance contracts, or the technicians required to keep it running. The United States Army currently operates 16 Patriot battalions. Each battalion operates multiple batteries. The total value of American Patriot infrastructure, including missiles in inventory, is measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
RTX Corporation, formerly Raytheon Technologies, is the prime contractor on the Patriot system.
RTX is a publicly traded company. It reported total revenue of approximately $80 billion in 2024 across all its divisions, which include Pratt & Whitney jet engines and Collins Aerospace Avionics, in addition to Raytheon Defense Systems. The Raytheon segment alone reported net sales of approximately $26 billion in the 9 months ending September 2025. Operating profit margin in that period was 11.5%. 11.5% profit margin on a $26 billion revenue base. That is roughly $3 billion in operating profit from one division in 9 months. The Patriot program is not RTX's only product, but it is one of its most strategically important. International Patriot sales to Germany, the Netherlands, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Romania, Poland, and others drove significant organic revenue growth in 2024 and 2025.
Poland alone approved a Phase 2 Patriot contract worth up to $15 billion. That number requires context. Poland is one country. $15 billion for air defense. That is more than the annual defense budget of most European nations, spent by one country on one system. The reason is simple. Ukraine changed the calculus. Every country that shares a border with Russia or sits within range of Russian ballistic missiles looked at what happened in Kyiv and made the same decision. They needed Patriot, and they needed it now. That decision created a demand problem that RTX and Lockheed Martin, which manufactures the PAC-3 MSE interceptor under a separate contract, were not prepared to meet. In 2023, Lockheed Martin produced approximately 375 PAC-3 MSE interceptors. In 2024, after emergency investments and production line expansions, they delivered more than 500, a 30% increase that was celebrated as a major achievement.
In January 2026, the Pentagon signed a 7-year framework agreement with Lockheed Martin to increase production from 600 missiles per year to 2,000 missiles per year by 2030. 2,000 missiles per year by 2030. That is the target. In the meantime, in a single large-scale Russian missile attack on Ukraine, 60 to 65 PAC-3 interceptors can be fired in a single night. Under U.S. Army standard operating procedures, defending against a month of Russian ballistic missile activity requires between 122 and 244 interceptors. 1 month of Ukrainian air defense. At the low end of the estimate, that is 1/4 of what Lockheed Martin produced in all of 2024. This is the fundamental problem with precision-guided munitions in modern warfare. They are used in seconds. They take 2.5 years to build. The production lead time for a PAC-3 MSE interceptor is 24 months for the missile body, 30 months for the solid rocket motor. If you order a missile today, it will be ready in 2 to 2.5 years. If a war starts tomorrow, the missiles you fire in the first month cannot be replaced until the war is potentially over. The United States learned this lesson in 2026. The Center for Strategic and International Studies analyzed munitions expenditure during the US-Iran conflict and found that the Pentagon had expended approximately half its entire Patriot interceptor stockpile in 7 weeks of combat operations. 7 weeks, half the stockpile. Ukraine ran out entirely. By early July 2026, PAC-3 inventory was exhausted. Russia launched a barrage of 23 to 24 ballistic missiles. Ukraine intercepted 0. For the first time since Patriot batteries arrived in Ukraine, ballistic missiles flew through uncontested. This is the hidden economics of missile defense that nobody talks about when the cameras are on the intercept footage. The active radar seeker in the PAC-3 MSE is the component that guides the missile to within centimeters of its target in the final seconds of flight. It is the most technically demanding component in the entire system. It requires specialized semiconductor materials, precision optical alignment, and software that must function correctly at Mach 5 under extreme aerodynamic stress. Boeing manufactures that seeker at one facility in Huntsville, Alabama. In 2025, that facility produced approximately 650 to 700 seekers. The entire global output of PAC-3 MSE interceptors is therefore constrained by the production rate of one building in one city in one state. When Ukraine proposed manufacturing its own Patriot missiles domestically, an idea that gained political support in 2026, the US technical community identified the seeker as the single hardest component to replicate. Not the rocket motor, not the warhead, the seeker.
A component so specialized that it is effectively manufactured in two places on Earth, and both of those places are in the United States. Boeing began expanding seeker production capacity in 2026, following direct Pentagon intervention and additional funding. The expansion will take years to complete. In the meantime, the Army is pursuing a parallel track. A separate program is attempting to develop a next-generation interceptor that costs less than $1 million per missile, compared to the $4.2 million PAC-3 MSE. The concept is to break the supply chain into simpler, cheaper components that can be produced faster and in larger quantities. Whether that program succeeds in time to matter is an open question. Before February 2022, Patriot was a well-established defense program with steady international sales. Countries bought batteries on decade-long procurement timelines. Delivery schedules stretched years into the future. The urgency was measured in strategic planning cycles, not weekly news cycles. After February 2022, every conversation changed. Germany ordered 3 additional Patriot batteries. The Netherlands accelerated its procurement. Romania signed new contracts. Kuwait expanded its inventory. Japan, already a Patriot operator, began discussions about significantly increasing its holdings in response to North Korean ballistic missile tests. And Poland. Poland approved Phase 1 of a Patriot purchase. 4 batteries, 16 launchers, 219 PAC-3 MSE missiles for $4.75 billion. Then approved Phase 2 for up to $15 billion more. In the space of 3 years, Poland went from a country with a modest air defense budget to a country committing $20 billion to a single missile defense system. RTX's defense backlog, the total value of contracts signed but not yet delivered, reached record levels in 2024 and 2025. Defense bookings in Q2 2025 alone reached $9.4 billion in a single quarter.
That is 3 months of new orders. This is what war does to a defense contractor's order book. Not just the direct cost of the conflict, the permanent change in how every nearby country calculates the minimum investment required to feel safe. Every Patriot battery Poland buys requires training for operators, spare parts contracts, maintenance agreements, software update licenses, integration with existing radar networks, site preparation and construction, dedicated communication infrastructure. A battery is not a product, it is a relationship that generates revenue for RTX for the entire 30 to 40-year operational life of the system. Now let's run the 2 scenarios. In a peacetime year, a Patriot battery sits in garrison. Operators conduct training exercises, software is updated, routine maintenance is performed, missiles are inspected and certified. A small number of interceptors are expended in test firings to verify system readiness.
The annual operating cost of a single Patriot battery in peacetime is approximately $40 to $60 million, including personnel, maintenance, spare parts, and the amortized cost of periodic test firings. The battery's missiles sit in their canisters, unused, slowly aging. PAC-3 MSE missiles have a service life of approximately 10 to 15 years before requiring major refurbishment or replacement. Even doing nothing is expensive. In a wartime year, the picture is completely different. Ukraine's Patriot batteries have operated under conditions no peacetime planner anticipated. Continuous operations, minimal downtime, Radar running 24 hours a day tracking hundreds of incoming threats. Operators making intercept decisions in seconds. Under those conditions, a battery can expend its entire missile load in a matter of weeks. Replacing that load at $4.2 million per missile, with 16 missiles per launcher and multiple launchers per battery, costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Per battery, per resupply cycle. And the missiles cannot simply be driven in on a truck. Each PAC-3 MSE arrives sealed in a launch canister that is also the storage container. Loading the canister onto the launcher, running system checks, and certifying the missile for operational use requires trained technicians following precise procedures. There are not enough trained technicians. There are not enough spare canisters. There is not enough of anything, because no one planned for a high-intensity conventional war in Europe in 2022. That is the honest summary of where the Patriot program stands in 2026. A system that took 20 years and $35 billion in today's dollars to develop. A supply chain that involves 13,000 companies and a single seeker factory in Alabama. A missile that costs $4.2 million and takes 24 months to build. A war that can consume a month of production in a single night. And a defense contractor posting $3 billion in quarterly operating profit while governments on 3 continents line up to sign contracts they cannot afford to not sign. But there is one more layer to this story, and it is the layer that makes the economics of missile defense genuinely uncomfortable. The Patriot system does not have a perfect record. It has a complicated one. In the 1991 Gulf War, the United States Army publicly claims that Patriot had intercepted 80% of Iraqi Scud missiles fired at Saudi Arabia, and 50% of those fired at Israel. These numbers were announced at press conferences. They ran on the front pages of newspapers. The Patriot became a symbol of American technological superiority. Then came the independent investigations. The United States House of Representatives investigated. The General Accounting Office investigated. Israeli Defense Forces analyzed their own footage. The conclusion reached by multiple independent assessments was that the Patriot's actual kill rate against Scud warheads in 1991 was somewhere between 9 and 40%, depending on the methodology used. 9%, not 80, not 50, 9. The gap between the claim performance and the actual performance was not a small rounding error. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of what the radar was detecting, what the interceptors were actually hitting, and what constituted a successful intercept. This matters for the economics, because the entire market value of the Patriot, the reason 40 nations operate it, the reason Poland is spending $20 billion on it, the reason RTX books $9 billion in orders in a single quarter, rests on the belief that the system works. In Ukraine, the picture is more nuanced. The Patriot successfully intercepted multiple Kh-47 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, weapons that Russian military planners had publicly described as invulnerable to any existing air defense system. The intercepts were documented and confirmed. The Patriot demonstrated capabilities beyond what most analysts had expected. Against Russia's upgraded Iskander-M ballistic missiles, the picture is more complicated. The Iskander-M performs evasive maneuvers in the terminal phase of flight and releases decoys designed to confuse the interceptor's radar seeker. Ukrainian Air Force officials have publicly acknowledged that intercepting the Iskander-M is significantly harder than intercepting cruise missiles or older ballistic designs. The specific challenge is the terminal maneuver. A missile that changes direction in its final seconds of flight forces the interceptor to solve a targeting problem it was not originally designed for. The PAC-3 MSE's hit-to-kill approach, physically colliding with the incoming warhead at closing speeds exceeding Mach 10, provides a significant advantage over older fragmentation-based systems. But it requires near-perfect tracking data in the final seconds of engagement. When the target maneuvers, that data becomes less reliable. This is the fundamental tension in the missile defense business. The system is always defending against the threat it was designed for. The threat is always evolving to defeat the system. The response to an evolving threat is a software update, a new interceptor variant, a hardware upgrade,
each of which costs money, takes time, and must be funded through the same government budget processes that struggle to keep up with peacetime demand, let alone wartime consumption. The PAC-3 MSE interceptor is itself an answer to the limitations of its predecessor, the PAC-2. The PAC-2 used a blast fragmentation warhead, exploding near the target and destroying it with shrapnel. The PAC-3 uses hit-to-kill technology, physically colliding with the incoming missile at closing speeds exceeding Mach 10. The switch from PAC-2 to PAC-3 added years of development time and billions of dollars of investment to produce a fundamentally more capable interceptor. Russia is now developing countermeasures to hit-to-kill technology. China is watching and learning. The next generation of threats will require the next generation of interceptors. That development program will cost tens of billions of dollars, take 15 years, and produce a missile that costs more than $4.2 million per round. And the factory in Alabama will still be the only place making the seeker. This is how the defense industry actually works. Not as a product market where competition drives down prices. As a closed system where the government is the only customer, the contractor is the only supplier, and the price is whatever the threat requires. A Patriot production line is not a light switch. You build it over decades, staff it with engineers who spend entire careers learning to make one specific thing extremely well. And you keep it running even when the order books are thin, because shutting it down means starting from scratch when the world changes. The United States learned this after the Cold War. The 1990s drawdown shut factories, cancelled programs, and erased manufacturing expertise that took 30 years to build. Rebuilding it in the 2020s cost more money and more time than simply maintaining it would have. The world changed again in February 2022, and then again in the spring of 2026, when the Gulf burned through more Patriot interceptors in 7 weeks than the entire global production line makes in a year. The factories are now running at maximum capacity. Overtime shifts, emergency funding, a 7-year contract to triple output by 2030. 30 months of lead time cannot be compressed by political urgency. The missile destroys its target in 4 seconds. It takes 2.5 years to build. It costs $4.2 million, and there is exactly one factory on Earth making the component that guides it. Right now, every government that shares airspace with a ballistic missile threat is calling that factory. The line is long, the wait is 2 years, and the price goes up every time the world gets a little more dangerous. The world has been getting more dangerous for 4 years. RTX's stock price has reflected that fact accordingly.